Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This is going to hopefully be a short lecture to go over a few things because I've given you some readings to do and a short writing exercise and a discussion board. So I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what we did last week. Basically was an overview of the course, what we're going to do this semester and next semester, what your thesis will look like, the structure of your thesis. And we started talking about some big questions that you might have to start thinking about how we're going to narrow down your research questions, what topic you're going to kind of look at and how we're going to do it. If you remember, we talked about the structure, the overall 5-chapter structure, and you're going to start with the Chapter 1, which has the statement of the problem, an overview, statement of the problem, purpose of the study, rationale, research questions, definition of terms. Big lot in that first chapter. It's not as long as it sounds, but there's a lot in it. Second chapter is literature review. Third chapter is methodology. Fourth chapter is your findings, the data that you collect, presented, and then the final chapter is discussion and implications. So what I want to do today is look at a article and show you where these things appear in research articles and that they are sometimes moved around, but they're there. So when you start doing your literature research, you will find these elements in articles, and you'll translate them into the your research paper. So I just wanted to show you kind of the connection between your thesis and research papers. Publications, as we go through this, you'll see that it's not in the same order that we're going to ask you to do it in for your thesis, but that's because different publications and different fields have different norms for what should be in a paper and where it should be. But you'll see the elements there, and I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how it looks. So you are going to be writing an abstract. Basically, the abstract is a short summary of the paper, and also your important findings should go in there. Some fields don't do that as much as others, and basically somebody could read your abstract, read the keywords. You're not going to have to do keywords for us for this paper, but read your abstract and get an idea of whether they want to read the paper or not. And this is something that you should do when you're reading for your literature review. Sometimes you find a title, it's like, oh, this title's perfect, it's going to have what I want, and then you go and read the abstract and it's like, no, it doesn't have anything I want. So it can save you a lot of reading. So we talked about our Chapter 1, an introduction and an overview of and statement of the problem. So this overview and kind of introduction, U.S. classrooms are becoming increasingly diverse with each passing year. This abstract is actually a group study abroad program which 3 professors, Hee Jung, Dr. An, Dr. Hong, and Dr. Fuentes, all participated in, traveled to South Korea and to enhance cultural awareness of Korea. So the overview and statement of the problem, and problem is not negative, it's just kind of the context, like the big picture. U.S. classrooms becoming more diverse every year, goes on to give some statistics to back it up, quotes a couple of studies here that when you're making statements about the problem, you usually want to back that up with other people who have studied that problem. These may also appear in your literature review, but it might just be here as support for your other papers that identify gaps. It could be something that's a think piece by somebody that identifies gaps, or a overview of multiple research studies that kind of uses multiple resource studies to make a point. So that's your statement of the problem. Here is the purpose of the study. It was a culture. This study abroad was a way of enabling priests and in-service teachers to have learning experiences, develop multicultural awareness, and this chapter. This was a chapter in a book as opposed to a research study, but has the same elements. Shares the program, its effects, and its implication. We talked about having a theoretical rationale or framework. In this paper, they're using experiential learning as part of the theoretical framework for the study. Also, multicultural awareness and competences is part of the rationale and background for the study. Culturally competent teachers seek to gain knowledge and learning in order to provide more culturally relevant experiences. So those are theoretical backgrounds and rationale for the study. Then we come to the lit review. And I think I may have said the lit review is the least structured of the chapters in many ways because I can't tell you what kind of sections to put it in. It's going to depend on what literature you find. So here they're talking about preparing teachers of linguistically and culturally diverse students, teachers in international immersion experiences. So you see they're talking about different, they're referencing different people who've studied this. You are going to be giving a more complete review and summary of the literature, but you can see they're talking about different people who have studied this issue. Here it's a very short literature review. Yours is going to be much longer. It often depends on how many pages, what's your word count in a chapter or in an article. You need to compress some of this material in order to fit it into the constraints of the space. Here you're not going to have to do that. So what they're calling program design here is actually the methodology, because they're talking about how they design this program, which is their study basically. So they designed it with pre-trip workshops, overseas education program, and post-trip workshops. And it lays out the stages of what they did in their study. And they obviously had planned this ahead of time. You can't just go willy-nilly into a study and then write about what you did. The program design had to be laid out ahead of time, as with the methodology. But once you get past it, you talk about it you're going to write it in past tense, even though you haven't done it yet, because as you read it, you're going to read it when it's done, so you're reading it in past tense. Explain more about that when we write that chapter. So this details what they did, graphs of where they went, so a layout of what they did. Here are the research questions. Now in this case, the research questions do not come into the beginning. We're not put in the beginning as yours will be. They pulled them out here. They probably mentioned them in the in the overview. They didn't lay them out like this in studies, in actual questions, but they would have alluded to them, and you would have not been surprised that these were the questions. So it's a mixed quantitative and qualitative study. Quantitative is when you collect numbers. Qualitative is when you collect anything other than numbers. We're going to look a little bit at how they collected it, which will show in their data, or maybe it's farther down here. So there are two questions. In what ways and to what extent, if any, did participants in the study abroad program alter their level of cultural awareness after participating in the program? In what ways and to what extent, if any, did the participants alter their intended pedagogical practices after participating in the program? Then they describe their participants, which you are going to do also in your study. Here are the data, the participants' demographic information. And then here is how they were collecting data. This is a rundown of how they collected their data. So they did a cultural awareness survey before and after, a trip survey before and after, and a reflection journal that they had the people that went with them, pre and in-service teachers, fill out, and anecdotal records. This can be some things that they observed and recorded in a journal. The results here, they've broken down by research questions, and they have presented them in numbers. Here they did mean scores of the survey. The survey is what they call a Likert scale survey. Usually they're like 1 to 5, and you mostly agree to mostly disagree. You've all taken those surveys. So they developed pre and post surveys so they could see any changes, and they did statistical analysis. They looked at the difference between the two before and after. They didn't do a statistical, they just looked at the mean scores. They didn't do a statistical analysis. And then here for the second one, they did, this was more based on qualitative analysis, and they reported the data here. That's chapter 4, where you report the data. Chapter 5 that you're going to be doing are a discussion and implications for teacher education, and they combine them again. We have space challenges in writing a chapter or a article, but they discussed what the impacts of their study will be on education. And references, of course. Just a note here, anything that's in your reference list is cited in the paper. And anything cited in the paper needs to be in the reference list. The two should match, and I tend to be pretty anal about making sure that they do match. And again, a difference here. Here are their key terms and definitions, and you need to, some of the definitions here, you may think, oh, it's just obvious what this definition is, but you want to make sure that what you're measuring in your study, people who are reading the study understand it the same way you do. So when you come up with your research questions, you're going to define some of your terms so that you're on common ground when you're reading the study. You understand what they mean by study abroad program, because we think of study abroad programs, for example, as where students go over, undergrads go over and live in a different country and take courses there. This was not the same kind of study abroad program. So a definition will help you come to a common understanding of what that term means in this particular situation. And all of these things are things we'll go over. I'm going to be a little bit repetitive as we go through. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give you a headache by scrolling that quickly. Are going to be things that we're going to go back to and repeat and go over and over again, so that when you start to write, it just will help. I'm going to present it to you in several different ways, because that's good pedagogical practice, but also because this is probably something that feels so outside of what you're used to, that'll be good to knock around with these terms more than once. Okay, so this week I'm going to give you some reading. Kaplan and Fiola, I want you to read, it's a guide to writing action research. Basically, it's an internal document that was written by our current associate dean and a past professor. I'm not going to hold to absolutely everything in this chapter. It's just kind of an overview of what you're going to be, of what a action research paper looks like, or thesis looks like. I think, I don't remember if they mention it here, because here they're mostly talking about thinking about your ideas and thinking about how to come up with a question and research questions. But if the order in some of what they've written seems off, it's because we've changed how the chapters were written. So if you have a question between what they say and what I'm giving to you, go with what I'm giving to you or ask me. I'm also giving you this article by Amy Anderson, An Introduction to Teacher Research, just to introduce you again to what it means to be doing research in your own classroom or library, because you're going to be mostly using action research is basically doing research with your own students in your own space. So that's what we encourage you to do in this thesis. If you have a real desire to do something outside of that, where you're exploring a bigger question, we'll talk about that. But it's probably going to be easier to do an action research type of paper. And then the final thing I'm giving you to read is a article by Dr. An, Dr. Hong, and an article by Dr. An, Dr. Shin, and Dr. Kim that I just would like you to skim through and again identify the elements that we just looked at in the other paper. Just as kind of practice. You don't have to read the whole paper, just kind of look at it, see what they're calling different things, see if you can identify the different elements that we just mentioned, such as, can you find the rationale? Can you find the research questions? Do they have a definition of terms or not? Not every paper does have a definition of terms, but it can be useful, and you are going to have one. And then I have an assignment that comes out of the Kaplan and Fiola chapter that is a way to get you writing and to get you thinking. I'm not going to be grading this. I will be reading it, but it's a way of exploring your research questions and thinking about the process of writing a paper and how it's similar to other things that you've done before. And we will have a discussion. I want to kind of take one of the last element from this exercise and take it to the discussion board. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I will see you on the discussion board.